Ah yes, Spain, a country home to many great architectural marvels. From the wonder of the palace at Alhambra, to the Grand Mosque at Cordoba, to the seemingly misplaced Egyptian temple of Madrid. Long story, I might get to it in another episode. But history has bequeathed this country with too many wonders to count. However, there was a time before all these were built. Today, we will be visiting one of the oldest of the country's architectural marvels. And not only was it a practical structure, it is one of the best surviving in Iberia from ancient times. Segovia is seemingly a normal Spanish town. Located in Castile and Leon, less than 50 miles north of Madrid, it is home to a population of about 50,000. Hardly a standout in a country of 50 million, however, it does stand out with its history and geography. The old city sits perched atop a hill in an otherwise flat plain. Since ancient times, a fortress has sat on top of this hill for its strategic location. Many of its walls are still intact, making for an imposing sight all the way into modern times. Even its gates preserve its Moorish roots and architecture. In addition, the city's alcazar has been well maintained, and the traditional church still sits on top of the hill. Yet, one special structure predates all of these. That is, the city's Roman aqueduct. Built sometime between 80 and 120 AD, it has been around for nearly 2,000 years. Looking much the same as it had been planned by its original builders, it runs throughout the city for about 2 kilometers. In total, there are 167 arches that tower over the city. Measured from the ground to the water channel above, the Segovia Aqueduct rises about 90 feet above the ground. Not bad considering the share of modern buildings that even reach that height. If you follow the water channel from its end in the height of the old city all the way through the town, it ends in this park. Here it evens out to eye level and you can even see inside it for yourself. Like gutters on a home, leaves and other debris gather in the duct. We can only assume that it was somebody's job to climb on top of this thing and clean it out from time to time. This is ultimately why the aqueduct was decommissioned in the 1970s. Allowing leaves, birds, and other unwanted items to freely enter the water channel is not up to modern health codes. It simply wasn't worth the maintenance costs of an inferior water source to keep it running. That of course doesn't mean the aqueduct was going anywhere just because the water stopped flowing. Obviously, what we see above the ground is much too short to carry water a practical distance. A distance of under 2 kilometers is all that's visible to tourists. So where is this water coming from if the aqueduct was necessary to import it? The water originates some 9 miles away, or 15 kilometers, in the nearby mountains. However, how did it get to the city if we can't even see it? The secret is that the Romans constructed a series of buried stone water channels through which the water travels to Segovia unseen. This would have been critical in the event of a siege. Cutting off the water supply would have been the first thing an enemy army would do, and by hiding it from view, it bought the defenders in the town some time. The only place in town the aqueduct is seemingly interrupted is in this small building. This is the closest thing the Romans would ever have to a water treatment plant. Here, the water would be given a chance to settle, allowing contaminants to sink to the bottom. While debris at the bottom would ultimately need to be scooped out by hand, this was a lot cleaner than just allowing the water to continue on its course, and of course, this prevented a lot of things from building up in the channel that beyond what would just fall in there naturally. Now, one of my favorite facts about the aqueduct concerns these holes that are carved into almost every stone. As you can guess, these originate from the original Roman construction process. This is so that a large iron claw could safely grasp onto it, hoist it, and place it up to 90 feet in the air. Not content with these open holes as they appear today, the Romans crafted plugs to fill them upon their completion of the structure. In fact, it is from these plugs that we know how old this site must have been. These plugs have allowed us to date it sometime between 80 and 120 AD, because each plug bore the initials of the emperor who was in power at the time. Since we know the time period of most Roman emperors, it gives us a general time frame. In total, there are about 20,000 blocks making up this structure, meaning there were a lot of holes to fill. However, we can't be sure if some or all the holes are plugged, as this would have been a highly labor-intensive task and would have required just frankly a lot of extra wasted effort. Even though the Romans, Visigoths, Moors, and Castilians all occupied the city since its completion, no ruler ever felt compelled just to knock it all down. Water is of course a necessity for life, and it would have been hard to find an alternative to this extraordinary piece of engineering. In fact, for many viewers, this duct was still in use to provide the city with water within your lifetime. It was in 1973 that the aqueduct was finally decommissioned and replaced with a fully modern system. However, it would be misleading to say that it has always been operational until then. During the 11th century, as the Reconquista came to the Segovia's gates, it is speculated that the Moors deliberately knocked down a section of the aqueduct in the hopes of making the city a less attractive target. Needless to say, a lack of running water made the city a less desirable place to live, and was likely abandoned by the time Christian forces conquered the area in the year 1085. The aqueduct would ferry little more than rainwater into the city for the succeeding decades. It wasn't until the reign of Queen Isabella centuries later that this would be solved. It was then that the city was ordered to rebuild the site in the exact way it was during Roman times. For the most part, this is how it remains to this day, plus or minus a few modern patch-ups. While the immediate benefits of the aqueduct need no further explanation, it has had a lasting cultural impact on the town. The famous arches have earned a place on the city's seal, and its likeness can be found all over the city, and even on the aqueduct itself. Furthermore, the city was home to a mint in ancient times, as well as medieval times, and even relatively modern times. Although it struck its last coins here in the year 1869, the mint mark was none other than that of its famous arches. While today the aqueduct doesn't bring in much water, it does bring in thousands of tourists from all over the world to see it for themselves. While many isolated towns are scarcely visited by outsiders, something the city has inherited from countless generations in the past continues to put Segovia on the map. While the city may not be on the way to anything or inside a major Spanish city, the Segovia Aqueduct has stood proudly for 2,000 years, never ceasing to take people's breath away. Surely it will continue doing so for generations to come.